Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Visa Vibes. I'm Emily Newman. I am the managing partner of Reddy Newman Brown PC, an immigration law firm in Houston, Texas. Alongside me is my partner Stephen Brown. Together we've helped businesses, professionals, families navigate the constantly changing and evolving landscape of U.S. immigration law.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Looking forward to starting this off kind of a more informal way of sharing information and updates of the immigration world. It's always changing, like you said, and I think we're in a period of a lot of change, right? New administration, new strategic goals, new regulatory goals, and we're going to go ahead and try to keep our listeners informed with this and do this weekly podcast.
Yeah, so we're going to be covering all of the major policy shifts, agency trends, any breaking news that's going on in immigration and what it all means. Some of our episodes will have guest experts joining us. Others we're going to focus on deep dives into key immigration topics, and we'll of course keep you updated on everything immigration happening in real time. So thank you so much for turning into our first episode. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. And if there's a topic or question you'd like us to cover, let us know. So today, we're going to be spotlighting the H-1B visa. We want to break down the myths and misconceptions about this category. There's been a lot of talk about it on social media and in the news. So we hope to leave you with a sense of the value that this visa actually brings to the United States.
Yeah, so, Emily, this really hit all of a sudden right around Christmas time. Trump announces this policy advisor for AI. That's all it is. We're not talking about a cabinet level position, somebody with DHS. It was an advisor on AI who, Shriram has a ton of experience in AI. He's created multiple platforms with Microsoft, and all of a sudden everybody blows up because he's got some previous tweets about how important the H-1B visa is and the country cap issue, right, that faces Indian nationals and Chinese nationals and actually now everybody, right, for most categories. And all of a sudden everybody's an H-1B expert, right? And it's, there's cooks at McDonald's, there's cashiers at convenience stores that are getting H-1Bs, and they're taking all the jobs. And that's simply not what it is. H-1B is a very specific visa, right? It's specialty occupation, which means the position has to require a degree in a specific field. And Emily, I heard there's millions each year. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, there is a limited number of visas. There's a cap or quota that was set by Congress. It's 65,000 visas per year. And then in addition to that, we exempt 20,000 U.S. master's degree holders from that cap. So it's literally a total of 85,000 new visas being issued every year. Guess what? 85,000 is nowhere near enough what our country needs. And so in order to actually decide who gets the new visas every year, it's actually done by a random lottery.
Yeah.
Can you believe, a random lottery decides who gets these visas, who's the best and brightest, which companies get to utilize this program. So that lottery process, it's coming up very soon. It starts in March of every year. We basically enter everyone's name in a hat, an electronic hat through this electronic registration process. There's not really any vetting into the applications. There's no looking into the company. It's literally just putting names in a hat by each company that wants to sponsor someone. And then the government does a random electronic drawing and notifies the people that were selected around March 31st. We then can start filing applications. So one of the main requirements of the H-1B, you mentioned it has to be a specialty occupation. So it's only for jobs that are requiring bachelor's degrees in a specific field of study. But number two is the labor condition application. Can you get us an idea of what that is and how people are thinking that cooks and chefs can get these visas when really it's not true?
Yeah, so what we've seen, right, is people have found all of a sudden, they've done all this digging. H-1B LCA data is publicly available and you can search it, and to their point, anybody can file an LCA for any position. and you'll get it certified. The LCA is very basic information. It's company information, where is the individual going to work, what their job title is, match that to an SOC code, which is kind of a generalized code that the government has for different occupations, and then what the prevailing wage and the salary are. That's it. There's no further analysis than really is it filled out right at the LCA stage, and is the prevailing wage, or the offered wage higher than the prevailing wage for the area for that occupation. And so there is all of this information is publicly available, and you can look it up. And people have found that there have been LCAs submitted, but guess what? An LCA, Emily, it's not anything related to the benefit other than a prerequisite to file. You have to have a certified LCA to file for an H-1B. So, I could go get a LCA certified next week for an underwater basket weaver. That doesn't mean I'm going to get an H-1B certified, H-1B approved. It just means I filled out a 6-page document correctly, right?
Yeah, so once you file that H-1B, what is the adjudication process like? What are they looking at? What do they look at on that LCA to verify whether it actually qualifies?
Yeah, so this is where the heavy lifting is. Once you put together the petition, that's going to be an I-129 form with USCIS. You're going to have the LCA that's signed, certified, all that. And you're going to have documents to show that the position requires a degree, detailed job duties, documentation that the employer typically requires the degree in a specific field, not just any field, but that position requires a degree in a specific field, and then showing that the individual qualifies for that position as well. So, it's not just, hey, I require our this position to have a degree in nuclear physicist, but I'm going to just go get a high school student to do it. No, they have to qualify too. And USCIS does a very in-depth look at, one, is what you're saying matching the LCA? So if you get an LCA certified for a mechanical engineer, and then the job duties are cook, right? To take the example everybody kept using, they're going to deny it. They want to see that the job duties, what's being done, matches, and then is the individual qualified. And not only at the petition stage, but these are subject to vetting 24/7, all year long throughout the validity, whether it's USCIS doing site visits to ensure that, hey, everything's up to par, whether it's they send in information requests via email to make sure everything's matching when the individual goes for visa stamping. I mean, somebody the other day said H-1B is open borders. And I said, you definitely can't get more non-open borders when you have ultimately 4 government agencies that look at this. You have Department of Labor, USCIS, Department of State, and then CBP at some point have their hands on an H-1B.
Yeah, so I can file an LCA for a cashier.
Yeah.
To work at 7-Eleven. I can get that LCA certified
Absolutely.
by the Department of Labor. I can file an H-1B
Yep.
with that LCA for a cashier to work at 7-Eleven. Am I going to get that petition approved?
Absolutely not. You're going to get a request for evidence that looks like every other request for evidence. It's going to go through the 4 prongs of specialty occupation, and there's no way you can prove that, right? There's no way that you can show a cashier at a 7-Eleven, which is the one that they kept pulling. I guess there were some cashiers at a 7-Eleven store somebody did some LCAs for. There's no way it gets approved. With the way they go about this, they are really going into those petitions heavily. I mean, we've seen them question cases, not question, but send requests for positions that we know are specialty occupations. You cannot be a mechanical engineer in the United States without a degree in mechanical engineering. You just can't. And I've seen RFEs on that. We litigated a denial, for that. Not one of our clients, that they came to us. They had done it themselves, and it was obviously overturned. But it's a lot of vetting that goes into this.
All right, so now we're going to go through some of the common myths and misconceptions dealing with the H-1B program. So myth number 1, the H-1B is only for tech workers. Would you agree with that statement?
No, it's not. There's nothing that says it's only for tech. I think there is a large amount of tech that uses it because the skills, you aren't here. But we see architects, engineers, chemists, pharmacists, professors, that use the H-1B program. It's not limited to tech.
Yeah, doctors, physical therapists, healthcare has a huge shortage. We need healthcare workers. Sometimes we have to fill those positions with H-1Bs. Teachers. Someone on X was, creating a big deal about the fact that some school district somewhere was hiring teachers on H-1B, and there's teachers from other countries teaching our kids. Well, I'm sorry, but there aren't that many Americans who want to teach middle school in inner city. So you're just going to have to deal with it. If we don't have the workers, we need to get them from somewhere. The kids have to be taught.
Yeah, and rural too. I mean, we see this a lot with doctors, right? We're here in Texas, and you go out to Waller County, you get out rural, you get out to the middle of nowhere, and there, one or two doctor's offices in a 20-mile radius, and not every doctor goes to med school and says, I want to live in, small town Texas of 300 people. And sometimes, we have to have doctors from abroad that are like, yeah, that's great. That's what I want.
Yeah. All right. How about myth number 2? H-1B workers are just taking jobs from American workers.
This is probably one of the funniest things is that, one, we have a labor market shortage. We know that right now there are more jobs than there are workers. Economists are saying that everywhere. But it's not a pie, right? Where if I take a piece of pie, you're not going to get one. There could be as many jobs as we want, and then it's finding the right people. These H-1B jobs aren't just pull Joe Smith off the street and say you're doing this now. You have to have someone who has that skill.
Yeah. So people were, talking about how Tesla had layoffs, and at the same time they're filing H-1B petitions. Well, if Tesla is laying off people, and I don't remember what they were, but they were various positions, maybe administrative, accounting, finance, whatever they were, and they're filing H-1Bs for, software developers, data scientists. Those are not like cogs in a wheel that you can just replace and move people around. You need the skill, not necessarily the person, regardless of where that person happens to be from.
Yeah, don't forget the costs that are involved here. I mean, we just did a fee increase with the Department of Homeland Security, raised the fees for H-1Bs tremendously, right? And it's not easy. Then you've got all the compliance side that you have to hire people to be around that compliance side, lawyers, all that. It's a lot easier to hire an American worker if you can find it.
For sure. So what about the myth, or is it a myth, that employers abuse the H-1B system to underpay workers and get cheap foreign labor?
Yeah, so look, I think anything involving the government, there's bad actors. We see it at the post office. We see it at, we're seeing it right now on these some of these NGOs, whatever. But for the most part, I think most employers are playing by the right rules. And Department of Labor, you have to pay the higher of either the prevailing wage or the actual wage for similarly situated employees for the area of intended employment. And Department of Labor every year goes through and updates the wages for each occupation and for each area. We've got, God knows how many areas that they go through and update the salary every year. And then 4 wage levels, entry level, fully qualified, more supervisory and executive level, the 4 levels that they go through. And you've got to go through that process of getting through and determining the right SOC code, determining the right wage level, and then you're going to get that salary off of Department of Labor.
Yeah, and let's say a company has 5 software developers that they hire, they employ them, regardless of their status. Let's all say they're U.S. workers and they're all making $150,000 a year. They can't fire one of them and then hire an H-1B worker for $100,000 a year. That's a violation. That violates the LCA because they're paying less than the actual wage,
right,
regardless of whether it's above the prevailing wage or not. If that is happening, you have to report it. They are actively going through investigations. Wage and hour from the Department of Labor. USCIS has a tip form. There are so many ways to report when people are doing the wrong thing, and it works. The system works when people report it. It helps root out the abuse. Could there be improvements? Yeah. We need reforms for sure. But to scrap the whole system, which some people would like, just because some employers may be skirting the rules, I think is detrimental.
Well, what I think is funny about that is I keep seeing the screenshots online, Cognizant, Facebook, violations of something immigration related, and all these fines. Doesn't that say that the system works, right? You don't get fined $25 million because you've just been skirting around the rules and not getting caught.
Yeah, exactly. And those fines show other employers that this is the wrong way to do things and to make sure you're doing them right going forward. So that part of the system, I feel, does work. All right, what about the myth that H-1Bs are slave labor, that you can't change jobs and that helps depress wages? Is it possible to change jobs when you're on an H-1B?
Absolutely. It's very simple. And I think at this, when it comes to that, and we've represented employers who I think the rules protect the employee more than the employer on that side, right? Because employees can move companies anytime. They can, once you got that H-1B, you jump around, you go somewhere else. You have to go through the process, right? File the LCA, file the H-1B, pay the fees and all that, but you can move employers. And employers can't always recoup all that expenses that they put into it, the time, the effort, all of that. So yes, it's very easy, especially with AC-21. It used to, long time ago, you had to wait for everything to be approved. You can't start the job until then. Now, once the petition is filed, you can start with the new employer as soon as it's filed with USCIS.
Yeah. All right. How about once your H-1B expires, you have to leave the United States? There's a 6-year limit on H-1B visas, the new visas that are issued every year, that 85,000 I talked about. What happens when you get to the 6-year limit?
Yeah, and this is, I think, kind of ties into some of the accusations we saw about the not being able to change jobs. We have a couple countries that have significant backlogs in the green card, and we're going to have a episode about that. But Chinese and Indian nationals, they are waiting decades to get their green card. And what Congress did with AC-21 is allowed them to continue to extend their H-1B. So they can, continue to extend it. And I know it's very tedious to have to do that every 3 years. Fill out the paperwork, be at the whim of the government to not mess it up. And that's annoying for sure, but you can continue to extend beyond the 6 years.
Yeah. Now, another myth is that only Indians use the H-1B visa. We saw when this whole brouhaha kind of started around Christmas, there were just a lot of racist comments towards Indians and saying that they're taking all the jobs and terrible things being said. Is it only Indians that get this visa?
No, in fact, I saw somebody yesterday. Indian nationals had about 59% of new H-1Bs. I can't remember if it was last fiscal year or the year before. What the data that these people are looking at are renewals. They're looking at all the extensions. And a couple things to keep in mind with this. Number one, Indian nationals, Chinese nationals do have to extend their H-1Bs a lot more than someone from, say, the United Kingdom or from Canada or from Spain. Because of the green card caps and the backlog to India and China. They have to stay somehow. And then number two, there are less options for an H-1, for someone from India. India is not an e-visa country, so you can't, go and invest in your company, with a substantial but less than an EB-5 investment and work that way. Like, again, someone from the UK, someone from Canada might be able to. So when we talk about the extensions, you're going to see a lot more of Indian nationals, but we represented people from all over the world for H-1Bs.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, there are a lot of countries that have other visa options. There's E3 is specifically for Australian citizens. TNs are for Canadian and Mexican citizens that meet certain criteria. There's an H-1B1 visa, which is different from an H-1B. That's for Chile and Singapore. So all of these countries have other options. And then there's a lot of companies that are multinational companies that are able to use L1 visas where we don't have the same level of data tracking. We don't have LCAs for those, and so we're not able to see as much what types of jobs, what salaries. There's not the prevailing wage requirements. And we also have to think about the size of the country that people are coming from. Of course, India is going to have a larger share of H-1B visas because it's a very large, highly populated country. They're English speaking, and they value STEM education. Their
Yeah.
kids go into STEM and ours don't.
I think that's the big thing, right? When we talk about almost the culture side of it, American students are predominantly not always going into STEM. It's just not as valued, in high school, in middle school, in college, like it is in India or China or some of these other countries where there's a lot more focus on STEM. And so they're exposed to it earlier. They see it as a career that's worth doing, and then they pursue it.
Yeah, and I am a former STEM student.
I was not. I was about as far from STEM as I could get under my bachelor's degree.
So I have a biology, chemistry background. I was in a PhD program, biomedicine and all that stuff, and I switched to law. So
yeah, and it's. I think again, it's that culture. People. You see a lot more Americans wanting to go into law, wanting to go be doctors. Gosh, I know how many people in finance in Houston here, right? And that's not to say STEM isn't important, but then we also have to look at this, the amount of people in the United States that are working and the number of H-1B workers. It's a drop in the bucket in the global workforce.
Yeah, there was a study this was put up by the Society for Human Resource Management. There's going to be 6.7 million jobs added to the economy by 2033. That is less than 10 years from now. Do we really have 6.7 million college graduates coming out? Definitely not. There are not going to be enough people. Healthcare was one of the ones that's going to be seeing the major shortages. And IT as well, which everyone says, oh, they're having a really hard time finding IT jobs. Well, yeah, if you're a programmer, maybe it's going to be hard to find a job because AI is eliminating those positions. But if you're in cybersecurity, I don't think you're going to have any problem finding a job, and it's going to be that way for quite some time. So we may need to look at reskilling some of our workforce to be able to fill those jobs. And we also have what everyone's calling the silver tsunami. All the baby boomers are retiring at a much faster pace than other people are coming into the workforce. Right. And the younger generation is not necessarily coming to work for employers. They're very entrepreneurial right. and kind of doing their own things, the gig economy and all of that. All of this is just creating this perfect storm where we are not going to have enough people to service the number of people that we have in our country, and immigration is going to be key.
And when we talk about 6 million jobs, again, just getting back to kind of the top of our conversation here, again, H-1B has to be for a job that requires a degree in a specific field. And when you look at the new regulations, that you can't just have a general degree, like an MBA or a liberal arts degree. And so the positions have to be more hyper-focused than that. I mean, my first job did a lot of work selling steel. That didn't require a degree in a specific field, but it's a job that was a decent job, and it impacted a lot of different areas, but that wouldn't be an H-1B job because they didn't care what my degree was, just that I had one. So it's not like everything is taken over by H-1B workers, because it can't.
Yeah. And then last myth we want to cover is that the H-1B is just a permanent visa that allows people to get a green card. It's an easy path to get to a green card. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely, would not agree. The typical green card process for a vast majority of people, and for an employment-based green card, is going to be probably about a 4-year process. When you figure the perm labor certification, the first step, that's going to take about 2 years. You're going to file a immigrant visa petition to get certified. You can do that in premium, but it's still going to take a little bit of time. And then to get the green card, another 1-2 years down the road. That's assuming your priority date is current. And we've seen now nobody's current in EB2, EB3. I think EB1, rest of the world, and EB5 set-asides are the only things that are current for everybody. Yeah, that are current for all nationalities right now.
And current means that a green card is currently available today for that person if they started the process today. For everybody else, there's basically a wait list where they give these cutoff dates and say you must have started your process before this date in order to have a green card available to you today. And for people from India and China, That's like decades that they're waiting.
I talked to someone today. They were like, when I got a priority date, we're just getting everything going. Like, when do you think I can get my green card? And Cato Institute did something last year. It was over 100 years. But when you factor in mortality rates, it was like 65 years to get a green card if you started today. 65 years. I mean, and when you figure most of these have come over, they've had multiple years of education, a bachelor's degree, many get a master's degree as well, either in their home country or here, starting when they're late 20s. I mean, they're done working, right, with that. So it's certainly not an easy process, that's for sure.
For sure. All right, well, I think that is about all we planned to cover for today. So we hope that we were able to dispel some of the myths that have been floating around about the H-1B visa. And we hope you'll come back for our next episode where we will dive into another hot immigration topic, give you all the updates on it, and get through some of the myths and give you some of the real information.
Thank y'all.